here. Brendan asks, in your opinion, by the way, I'm so tempted to play a music bed under these questions, but I will not do it, at least not yet. Brendan asks, in your opinion, why does there seem to be no initiative to separate football from basketball? Many basketball programs have suffered due to realignment, i.e., Q's, BC, Pitt. It seems short-sighted to drag basketball along with football when basketball is also a moneymaker and important to alumni. All right, big picture question here. I'll give my thoughts, and then I obviously want Cobb to chime in. Here's the deal. Basketball is a moneymaker, but with the exception of, a handful of schools, there are a few dozen, basketball does not make money. It's the NCAA tournament that makes money, that filters down to the conferences and then to the schools. It is such a moneymaker, and we'll get to the tournament in just a second here. Splitting it off, I think would be fine. I would like it. I talked to some coaches in the past month that have said football, and I think I mentioned this on last week's podcast in passing, from scholarship limit to the amount of offices the football program takes up at a given athletic department, the way it's operated, budget, everything. Football is on an island, especially major conference D1 football. It is not even remotely the same as any other sport. I think I said the difference between football and men's basketball is a greater gap than men's basketball to any other scholarship sport at a D1 school in most instances there. Football pays the bills. So while it would be great if we could have conference realignment split off, right? And the Big Ten went to 16 teams, but it was only USC and UCLA that did it in football, and USC and UCLA remain Pac-12 schools. That would be ideal, but it's not going to happen. At least it's not going to happen anytime soon, because football is funding so many of these athletic departments. It's under the umbrella of the athletic department. Separating that would mean that football would take all the money or most of the money. And what would happen then? Hundreds, and if not thousands of people would lose jobs. A lot of scholarship sports at a lot of these schools would simply go away. There would be workarounds, and there are schools without football, obviously Gonzaga, Xavier, a lot of Big East programs, right? But those aren't the ones that you're really seeing that much in realignment there. There's no initiative to separate football from basketball because so many of these athletic departments need football for sustenance to validate employing as many people as they do and having as many scholarship sports as they do. There would be some workarounds, but that chain is still so linked that we're not yet there. Some people see a future, David, where the football program is merely, it says USC on the helmet or USC on the jersey, and it's affiliated with the university, but it is an entirely separate entity. We could eventually get there. That's like a truly semi-pro kind of situation beyond what we have now. But the powers that be in college athletics are not willing to take that kind of step because it is a big one and it is a very, very heavy knot to untangle.
Yeah, so the people who are driving realignment right now, university presidents, power conference commissioners, they'll give you a lot of gobbledygook about the welfare of student athletes, but ultimately, I think their primary role is as CEOs of businesses. And when you're the CEO of a business, maximizing profit is your priority. And right now, the best way to maximize your profit as a conference or as a power conference school is by getting the most TV revenue that you can, because a lot of times booster donations are kind of tapped out. Ticket sales kind of tapped out as a revenue source for the most part. TV revenue is not. Media rights revenue is not tapped out. And if you can position yourself to maximize the revenue that you're getting from your media rights deal, that's what you're going to do. And football is the driver for that. And so that's the explanation for it. And everything else is secondary, including a lot of times even wins and losses. Talking about, Syracuse basketball, life was probably better for them in the Big East, right, than it has been in the ACC. But the money is better in their new world, and they kind of had their hand there. So and including the future of the NCAA tournament. That's another one of the things that is secondary to maximizing revenue, it appears. So my question in response to this question would be, why can't we have some schools that have multiple conference affiliations? Why can't we have a school that is in the Big Ten for football, but in another league for basketball and for non-revenue. I mean, to me, that seems like a relatively easy answer to some of these issues. But I mean,
it can. Now that does happen. Like there's a few sports, volleyball, beach volleyball, water polo, that USC and UCLA are not leaving the Pac-12 for, because the Big Ten literally does not offer them. So you get this in hockey, you get it in baseball sometimes. You do have that where a university will have affiliations with different sports in 3 or 4 conferences. That does happen, but we don't see the splinter between football, men's and women's basketball, and usually some of the other bigger sports. Maybe it should. And frankly, it probably should. For geographic reasons and budget reasons, it probably should. But again, once the money is so huge, universities are going to validate all this travel, saying we have it. We might as well do what we want. One conference affiliation. You got big bosses that get in a room and they're saying, yeah, we want you on board for everything, but we're not quite there. All right. Joseph Sox asks, similar question here. If college football separates itself from the rest of college sports, again, we're ways from that, and college basketball conferences are able to restructure without considering football, what are the first moves you'd want to see? Bring back the old Big East, Maryland to the ACC. Okay, so I'm simplifying this question. Here are the 5, my world, I can change everything. The 5 individual realignments that I would choose to return. This is only from a basketball perspective. I'm not concerned about how this would affect, no offense, football, women's soccer, baseball, none of that. This is only a basketball perspective. This is a college basketball podcast. And I'm not going to include, because my answer, I would keep USC and UCLA in the Pac-12, and I would keep Oklahoma and Texas in the Big 12. But I'm not including those. Those have not become material yet. So I'm not including those. So here's my 5 in order. Syracuse to the Big East. I mean, what are we doing here? Maryland to the ACC. I still, once or twice a year, will be writing something and will accidentally put Maryland in the ACC. I usually catch it myself, and if I don't, wonderful editor Marcus Nelson will catch it. I still do that. I still don't associate Maryland with the Big Ten. Number 3, Missouri to the Big 12. That school sticks out like a sore thumb in the SEC. Get them out of there, get them back in the Big 12, and officially renew the twice-a-year rivalry with Kansas. Number 4, a little bit off the radar, and this is, I've got some Northeast bias with this, but get Boston College back to the Big East. It is a waste of space and arguably has been the biggest loser of any power conference school in realignment over the past 20 years. It leaves the Big East for the ACC in 2003, has done nothing since. It had Matt Ryan play quarterback, and there was one brief moment in the early part of that where they were making a little bit of noise in the NCAA tournament, but since then it's been nothing. It has been disastrous. Andrew Carter for the News and Observer down in North Carolina had a good story earlier this week about how the ACC, you could say that this started, back in the 90s with the SWC getting broken up and all that, but really, as we understand these things now, Cobb, the ACC raiding the Big East and taking Boston College, Miami, Virginia Tech, and then later, obviously, Syracuse and Pitt and all that. And now look at the ACC. It's not going away, but it's not nearly operating from the strength of position that it once had. So that's 4. And then 5, I wouldn't consider this a top 5 important school. But again, I'm making the Big East from an 11-team league like it is now to go to 14. Rutgers to the Big East. The fact that Rutgers is in the Big Ten remains hilarious. It has no business being there. And the only reason Rutgers went to the Big Ten to begin with, Cobb, if you listen to the pod, maybe you remember I brought this up. Do you even remember why this happened? Do you remember what the impetus was to get Rutgers out of the Big East and into the Big Ten, aside from football? What was the other reason? Do you remember?
I really don't. I really have no idea.
It was because of the New York, New Jersey television market and the idea that they would be able to add a significant number of subscriptions to the Big Ten network for cable. And this is so outdated. Rutgers has done a fine enough job. I get that. They're actually finally treading water now, if not a little bit better than that. Get them out of there. Rutgers back to the Big East. So those are my 5. If I'd go back to how it was 15 years ago in general, 20 years ago, but Syracuse, Maryland, Missouri, Boston College, Rutgers. Any thoughts? Any follow-ups?
They say when you're flying into LaGuardia or JFK on a Tuesday night when Rutgers is playing Purdue, every window on the Manhattan skyline is flickering with the same TV broadcast of that Rutgers-Purdue basketball game. It's really amazing. To your point, Missouri really does look like a thumb sticking up out of the SEC footprint. Like when you look at a map, like it all makes sense. And then there's like Missouri sticking up way out of line there. Yeah, Kansas and Missouri, reuniting them was the first one I had written down. That was a natural basketball rivalry that I think made a lot of sense. One you didn't mention that I think would be just so important and so obvious. Let's get Gonzaga into an actual basketball like, no, I know everyone loves the WCC. Like this is my like football power conference elitist, sort of coming out. But like, it's fun. St. Mary's has their moments, and Santa Clara has their moments, and San Francisco was great this past year. But let's get Gonzaga into a real basketball conference, even if that's the leftovers of the Pac-12, post realignment. That would still, I think, be good for the game if we could get Gonzaga into a league and into a position where Gonzaga isn't this like flashpoint, which side are you on debate all season long, because with them continually being at the top of the KenPom rankings, we just every year have this debate over whether or not they're legit. And if we could get them some more games in January, February, and early March against quality opponents, then I think that would ultimately be good for Gonzaga and for the sport of college basketball.
Well, one, you're feeding into the next question, which I'll get to in just a second. Two, I wrote a column early May about this very thing, about how Gonzaga should look for an alliance with the Big 12 or Big East and literally try and schedule 2 or 3 games later into the season if it can. That was before we learned what happened with the Pac-12. And then we find out, like, the Pac-12 should, in my opinion, I'm not saying it will, the Pac-12 should look to bring Gonzaga in and improve its basketball product there, because it would make it more valuable. Hoya, we have another question here from Hoya Matali asks, will the Big East add anybody in realignment? So you bring up Gonzaga. All right, here's my read on this right now, because I think the Big East, it's considering, I think, going to one more, and has been considering that for basically since they brought UConn on. It's just been an ongoing curiosity there. Gonzaga would be the leading candidate. Now, I've been told that there's a lot of schools that would not vote to bring Gonzaga in for many reasons, the biggest being travel. Like they don't want to Providence, Villanova, St. John's, these schools don't want to have to fly across the country to play a program that under Mark Few is better than them, Villanova being the exception, like on a year in, a year out basis. Now, Gonzaga would also have to do travel, and they would have to do more travel, and you'd have to figure out a way to have them play at DePaul, and then you come back and you get Creighton on 2 days later, and you fly back home. I think they're constantly evaluating it. Now, remember, the Fox deal, the Big East has a deal with Fox. The majority of that deal, that's up in a couple of years. There's maybe potential for that. The Gonzaga, from a philosophical standpoint, is the best fit. And if Gonzaga was located instead of in Washington State, David, and was in the middle of Missouri or even in South Dakota, I think they'd be in the Big East by now. It's out there. And so, well, let me ask you. Should the Big East add Gonzaga or anyone else, or just stay at 11, in your opinion?
I don't feel there's a natural addition right now for the Big East. If Memphis gets desperate enough to where they're willing to go independent for football amid all this realignment, then Memphis would make sense because it's a really strong basketball brand. But they're in the process of trying to refurbish their football stadium and sort of doing a little peacock strut for the Big 12, the ACC, whoever, from a football standpoint. So it still seems like we're a ways out from that. I don't, at the top of mind, have a natural addition. I think Gonzaga joining the leftovers of the Pac-12 makes way more sense than Gonzaga joining the Big East.
All right, Nada, we've got a number of questions that have come in on the chat here. So fire one away. Cobb, you can take this one first.